There are few entertainers with the Broadway talent, the acting versatility, and the comedic experience to have kept them busy for more than 8 decades. My guest today links the days of radio and talking films with stage and television. Rose Marie sang for Presidents Coolidge, Hoover, and Roosevelt. She helped open up the Flamingo in Las Vegas back in 1946 and was the only original Hollywood Squares member to work on all of its many reincarnations with its many different hosts. You probably remember Rose Marie most for her role as the quick-witted comedy writer Sally Rogers on the Dick Van Dyke Show. It is a pleasure, an honor today to be spending time with Rose Marie. Welcome to Lincoln Live, Rose Marie.
Thank you, and how are you?
I am doing very well. Hey, kid, your resume looks pretty good for that next audition of yours.
Well, my golly, you really said it all. I don't like the part about 8 decades.
Well, you worked, W.C. Fields is in there, International House back in 1933. You were only 10 years old.
Well, I started when I was 3.
Yeah.
So it's a little unusual, I guess, but it happens to be true. The only problem is I'm the only one that's left. Everybody I worked with or knew or anything like that is dead. I'm the only one alive.
Yeah, I was going through some of the names. I think, for the most part, yeah, you're right. You mentioned 3 years old, Rose Marie. That was a talent contest you won.
That's right, at the Mecca Theater in New York. And I sang What Can I Say, Dear, after I say I'm sorry. And I had the voice that I have now. And, of course, I won the contest, 4 years old, 3 years old. A kid singing like that, and I won the contest and ran off the stage, and somebody threw a bouquet of red roses in one arm, and somebody threw a bouquet of red roses in the other arm, and meanwhile, the audience was screaming, "Bring the kid back, we want the kid, let the kids sing, let us sing." And I heard that, and I threw down the roses. I said, "Hold the roses, I got to take my bow."
Weren't they throwing money at you, too?
What?
Weren't they throwing money at you, too?
No, this was in Atlantic City.
Okay.
Where they threw the money at me.
All right.
At Evelyn Nesbitt's.
That's right. She called you up on stage, didn't she?
Yes, because I was singing with her.
Yeah.
I was sitting at the table, and I was singing with her, and she was smart enough to bring me up on the stage with her, and I sang with her, and that's when they threw money on the stage.
Tell me about your mother, Rose Marie. She apparently had a love for the stage. She took you to shows.
Yeah. She took me to all the vaudeville houses. Let me see, there was the Academy of Music, the Jefferson, and places like that. There was 14th Street, which was the 42nd Street of today. And it had a lot of theaters, and they had a lot of vaudeville, and my mother used to take me to see all these shows. I used to come home and do everything that I saw, and my mother's neighbors, used to entertain them, and they just thought I was the cat's meow.
See, where did you get that, Rose Marie? I know your dad had vaudeville blood, but was your mom in show business?
No, not at all. She just loved it and loved everything about it. Never got involved. My father took over as manager and everything when things started to happen as Baby Rose Marie.
That's right. Wasn't it, how did you get the name Baby Rose Marie?
I was in Atlantic City watching the Evelyn Nesbit show at a nightclub. In those days, nightclubs were family places. You could bring your kids and stuff like that. And she was singing, and I sang with her, and she brought me up on stage, and they threw the money like I told you.
Yeah.
Then I went off the stage, and she said to my father, "What's her name?" And my father says, "Dainty Rose Marie." She says, "She's a baby. Call her Baby Rose Marie."
Now, you were Baby Rose Marie until, what, 11? 10 or 11 years old?
I think till I was 85.
Oh, okay. You'll always be the baby.
I went through the horrible years of teenager and changed my name to Rose Marie.
Yeah.
Just Rose Marie.
You talked about your mom. Talk about your father for just a bit, because for good or for bad, his mob connections did open up some doors for you in Las Vegas.
Did you read my book?
Some of it, not the entire book.
My father, I did not like my father.
That's what I understand.
And I don't know how to put this, but I think he was a very mean, selfish man. And I felt sorry for my mother because my mother was Polish, and she just took everything he said as right, and it wasn't, you know. So I had no love for him. But he traveled with me. He became my manager. He did everything until I got married, and I came out to California.
Is it fair to say that maybe being on stage was your way of getting away from it all? Did you see it as an escape from your father?
What do you mean?
Well, when you're up on stage, it seemed that you were so natural and happy, and you were making people happy. For a lot of people, that's the escape that they need when they have a troubled life at home.
You know, I really didn't notice it. I really didn't know what was going on until later. And so it didn't bother me. I just went out and did my shows, you know. And I loved doing my shows. I loved doing what I was doing. So it didn't bother me until I think I started working at the Copacabana in New York. And I would, you know, he'd get mad because I picked up my own check, because he used to pick up my check. Then I realized what was going on. And he must have, oh God, I don't know, he must have gotten a lot of money in those days.
I went back and saw a song you performed in International House back in 1930. Yeah. And I knew you were 10 years old when I went in to view the video. I would have guessed you were much older.
No, I was about 10.
I mean, you have a mature face. You sang and you acted as though you were much more experienced than 10.
Well, I always did.
Yeah.
I always did. Everybody always thought I was older, but I won the contest at 3. I mean, you could look up the birth certificate. I was born in 23.
I couldn't find any scenes with you and W.C. Fields together.
I didn't do any. I just did the little cameo.
All right. Same way with Cab Calloway. He was in that. You just did cameos. You were never with either one.
Well, I did my film thing in Fort Lee.
Uh-huh.
And it was the funny thing about that picture. It's all about television, which surprises me. It was so far ahead of its time.
The clips I saw of W.C. Fields, my wife came into the living room and she said, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "Well, I'm laughing at W.C. Fields. That scenes are timeless."
Uh-huh.
It's just so funny. International House.
Yeah.
Bugsy Siegel hired you on as a headline at the Flamingo.
Well, Bugsy didn't hire me.
He didn't.
Bugsy was building the Flamingo.
Yeah.
And the mob got tired of sending him money because the Flamingo was the only high class, I don't know how to say high class, but it was a tremendous hotel. It was neons and lots of bright lights. It wasn't anything, you know, because they only had the Last Frontier and the El Rancho, which were cowboy places. So when he was building this thing in the desert, there was nothing but desert. And he was building this glorious thing like you would find in Monaco or something. And the mob got mad and said they're not going to send any more money. So he had to stop building, and the owner of the Hollywood Reporter said, I'll give you the money to finish it. And he did, and that's how the Flamingo opened. And the guy from the Reporter, I forgot his name right now, but opening night, we had a room full of stars that would choke a horse. We had Clark Gable, Lana Turner, Robert Taylor, Barbara Stanwyck. I mean, you name them, and they were there opening night. But this place was absolutely gorgeous. It was, as I said, like Monaco with the neon lights and this and that, and this was very strange to the people in Las Vegas. And so they didn't show up. They were afraid of it. So opening night, we were a smash with all the stars, and the show consisted of Xavier Cugat, Jimmy Durante, and myself. And the second night, we would jam because they stayed for a second night. There were no rooms, by the way, at the Flamingo. There was only a dining room, the casino, and the coffee shop. there were no hotel rooms. Everybody stayed at the old rancho. And the third night, all the stars went home, and we only had about 9 people to work with in the show.
Can you still do a pretty good Jimmy Durante?
Pardon me?
Can you still do a pretty good imitation of Jimmy Durante?
I sure can.
Would you please?
Why?
Well, he taught you that, didn't he? Didn't he teach you how to do an imitation of himself?
Well, I did it in my act.
Yeah.
I'm not an impressionist.
No.
But I did it in my act one time, and everybody thought it was wonderful. And I wound up doing a song every time I played the Capitol Theater in New York. I had to have a song written about Durante, and I would go to Jimmy, and Jimmy would show me how to do it and how to fleck my voice and how to do this and how to do that. And I had songs like I'm in love with Jimmy Durante, I wish I could sing like Durante, and things like that. It wound up being a big number in my act.
Was he genuinely nice?
Jimmy?
Yeah.
Jimmy was the darlingest man you ever want to meet. He was the sweetest man in the world.
He just came across that way.
He was that way.
Yeah. Now, what about Al Capone? You remember meeting Al Capone?
I remember meeting him, but I was invited to his house for a big party because all the other boys wanted to meet me. I was playing at the Palace Theater in Chicago, and he came backstage, talked to my father. He said, the boys want to meet the kid. And my father said, she does 5 shows a day. He said, well, we'll bring her back in time. And so the next day they came, and we went to Cicero, and they had this big dinner party, and there were about 24 guys there, all the bigwigs. Willie, oh, God, I remember all the guys. All the big shots of the mob. And they treated me like a little angel, you know. And Al picked me up, and he said, from now on, he said, you call me Uncle Al. And he gave me a dinner ring, a diamond dinner ring. And he says, we'll look out after you, don't worry. And he told my father, anything she wants, anything you need or what, you let us know. We'll take care of her. You have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I read he kissed you on the cheek and said, if you ever need anything, just tell your dad to call me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty good connection there, Rosemary. We got a lot more.
I'm getting a ringing. What?
Well, we got a lot more to talk about here. We're gonna come back and talk more with Rosemary on Lincoln Live today. We're gonna get into her radio career.
Wait a minute. I'm getting a ringing.
All right. Well, that's a good time to take a break then, Rosemary. Hold on. We'll have more on Lincoln Live in a moment. Radio played a big part in Rosemary's career. Had your own coast-to-coast program on NBC at the age of 5.
That's right.
Rudy Valley, Benny Goodman, you performed with those guys. Got any stories about Rudy Valley and Benny Goodman?
Well, I had my own show, which was Coast to Coast. Sunday mornings at 12:15. Me, a piano player, and an announcer. And it was for Julius Grossman Shoes. That was the sponsor, which, by the way, the store is still in New York on Fifth Avenue. But the funny part of it is my show was coast to coast, and they only had one store in New York. And I don't understand that. But the store is still there.
And you were 5 years old?
I was five or 6.
Yeah.
And then NBC, being affiliated with RKO, got letters saying that I was not a child, I was a 45-year-old midget, because no child sings like that. And so they sent me on a tour of vaudeville to prove I was a child, because NBC was affiliated with RKO. And I played all the vaudeville houses of RKO in the latter part of vaudeville. So I did vaudeville, and when I was 6, 7, about that age, and worked with all the big stars, Edgar Bergen, the Three Stooges. I mean, I was a headliner. When I did Murphy Brown, I went to Candace Bergen. I said, I worked with your father in vaudeville. I said, when he was doing the doctor sketch. She said, well, you couldn't play the nurse. You were too young. I said, no, I was headlining. I don't think she liked that.
In watching the video of you sing in International House back in 1933, you didn't have a bow in your hair. When did you start wearing a bow in your hair?
No, I didn't.
When did you start wearing a bow in your hair?
Well, I always did, but it was more prominent in the Van Dyke show.
And that became your trademark, I understand.
Yeah, that was strange, but it did.
And I know the answer, Rosemary, but I got to ask it. So
you know the answer to what?
The question I'm about to ask. Why the bow in your hair?
Yeah, what is it?
You're not going to tell me.
Of course I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
But what do you think it is?
I don't know. I haven't been able to find out.
Oh, all right.
I've asked your publicist. I've looked on the internet for answers.
Nobody knows.
No, I even have here right in front of me her famous hair bow, which had a strong personal significance that she refuses to elaborate on.
Well, it's there and it's still there. Okay. The original bow is at the Smithsonian.
I know. You and 9 other very prestigious women, including Carol Channing and Tippi Hedren and Julie Newmar.
Yeah.
All
There's
in
a
the
lot of my stuff at the Smithsonian. My baby Rosemary shoes, baby Mary Jane, brocaded Mary Jane shoes, the dress that I wore. I mean, it would fit a doll. It was so small. So all of that is at the Smithsonian. Some of the stuff from the Dick Van Dyke Show is there, too.
Hey, I want to talk about your husband, Bobby Guy. When did you meet your husband? Tell me about him.
I met him in Newark. I was working at the Terrace Room in Newark, and I was getting ready to open at the Capitol Theater in New York. And I had new gowns made and everything, and I broke him in at the Terrace Room. I was working there. And he was in uniform, and he came to play in the band because all the musicians, all the good musicians, were in the Army. So he was in the Army, and he just came in to play for the radio shows. And I was introduced to him by the bartender in the back, the service bar, and we both didn't drink, and we both had a cup of tea in between shows, and I saw him 3 days after I met him. I knew I was going to marry him.
Gosh, he played for the NBC Orchestra on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show before Doc Severinsen was ever there.
He was one of the best trumpet players in California. He did all the top shows. He did Dinah. He did George Gobel. He did Ernie Ford. He did, when he died, he was doing the Tonight Show.
Yeah, Louis Armstrong, Hoagie Carmichael, he worked with those greats, and then on to the NBC Orchestra.
Yeah, he worked with all of the best.
In 1951 and 52, you starred in a Broadway production of Top Banana. That was a Phil Silvers and Jack Albertson movie or production of Broadway. From there, Dick Van Dyke pops up next on your resume. Not a very good first year, kind of dismal ratings that first year, I understand.
Well, I didn't hear you.
Well, it's my understanding, Rosemary, that the first year of the Dick Van Dyke Show back in 1961...
Wait a minute, I'm getting something. Go ahead.
Okay, the Dick Van Dyke Show, it ran for 5 years, turned out to be very successful, and it still runs on cable. But I was wondering why that first year was such a struggle for ratings. Do you know?
A struggle?
Struggle. I heard that first year was nobody watched.
No, it wasn't a struggle.
Really?
We were canceled.
It was...
We were canceled.
After the first year?
Yeah, because we were bucking Perry Como.
Oh.
And Sheldon Leonard went back to New York and spoke to the sponsor. We were sponsored immediately. The sponsors were at the pilot and bought the show immediately. So we did about 13 shows, I think, and they canceled. Sheldon went back to New York and spoke to the sponsors and said, keep this show on, because I know it'll make it. It's just bucking Perry Como right now. But put it on for the summer. And they did, and that's what happened.
5 years. You had a good 5-year run.
Sure did.
Now, when the Dick Van Dyke Show ended, you hooked up with Hollywood Squares, right? How did that happen?
Well, after my husband died, I was in a funk. I couldn't work. Couldn't sing. I just fell apart because we were married, very happily married for 20 years. And his death was a big shock. So I didn't want to work. I wasn't even going to go back to the last year of the Van Dyke show, but John Rich, the director, came over my house and talked me into going back. And so I got a call to do Hollywood Squares. They said, you don't have to sing, you don't have to do anything. You just answer some questions. I said, well, that sounds okay. And I made 3 pilots, and I was with the show for 14 years.
Just quickly referencing back to Dick Van Dyke
What?
Show, the Dick Van Dyke Show, you almost quit after your husband died. You wore black on camera for the rest of the series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Password and I've Got a Secret, those game shows you were part of, too, back in the 60s.
I was the Arlene Francis of the West.
Yeah. Arlene Francis with what?
I said I was the Arlene Francis of the West.
I see.
I was doing every game show in town.
And then in the 90s and the early 2000s, you toured with Rosemary Clooney, Helen O'Connell, Margaret Whiting. That's 4 Girls 4.
That's right.
Yeah. Doris Day Show was also on your resume. Played her pal and her coworker on the Doris Day Show.
I was on that show for 3 years.
And now, is this true? Your last TV performance was a reunion special of the Dick Van Dyke Show back in 2004.
Yeah.
You plan on doing anything else?
Oh, well, I've been busy doing a lot of documentaries because the people that they want to know about are all dead, and I'm the only one that knows them. So I did Al Jolson and Sophie Tucker and people like that and told them all about them because I worked with them and I knew them. And I've been doing a lot of those, and I've been doing a lot of guest shots. So I've been pretty busy.
You were asked by someone when you had your star on the Walk of Fame about about retiring. Do you remember what you said?
No, I said I would never retire.
Yeah. You've been in show business your whole life. Why start something new now?
What am I going to do? Be a sales girl?
It's in your memoirs, Hold the Roses. That was released in 2006.
I'm writing my second book because everybody has told me the first one was so good, which surprised me because I wrote it myself. I didn't have any help, and everybody loved it, so everybody's after me to write a second book. So I started to write it, and I may have a second book soon.
What will it be about?
What?
What will it be about?
It's just a continuation of what I left out of the first one.
All right.
There were a lot of things that I forgot about in the first book. People that I worked with and people that I met and things that I did.
Yeah.
And I find out that the older you get, the more awards you get.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
I got a lot of awards to talk about.
All right. Well, Rosemary, this has been a pleasure. I've looked forward to this since your publicist booked it with me a couple of weeks ago. It's
well, that's very sweet.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much. You've been very kind.
Yeah, it's been fun talking to Rosemary on Lincoln Live.